early in the morning. I really appreciate that. We're going to start talking about the art of scientific talks. And this is very, very important and a skill that we don't really understand that we need until we're at a point that we need to talk to a public, right? And just kind of report our findings. So I think it's a really good initiative that we're working ourselves into what the skill actually is, right? And how just kind of talk about this a little bit. So I'm gonna see if I can go ahead. Oh, there it is. Change the slide. All right, so I'm gonna start with this quote from Professor Jennifer Archer at Stanford University. Stories are remembered up to 22 times more than facts alone. And I want you to think about this because I want you to frame all the presentations in a way that we tell a story, right? If we are giving facts, people tend to forget things, right? And on that light, uh, I wanted to show this picture of me when I was little. So when I was a little girl, I thought about being an artist, and you can see me there with a wig and a clown wig outfit and whatever, because I really enjoyed talking to people. I was really extroverted at the time. Little did I know that when you become a professor and a scientist, there's a lot of this going on as well, right? Because you have to be in front of audiences and you have to justify your findings and you have to be talking to the public, and there's a lot of communication that goes into it. Okay, so I kind of want to approach this talk in this way. Okay, and just bear with me because I'm using two computers and this is going to be really awesome. All right, so I basically divided the talk into three sections. So what's the content of your scientific talk? What's the presenter, right? What's your style? What things you should be doing? And what's the design of your slides? So the talk itself, right? The PowerPoint, the figures, these kind of things. And I'm gonna be walking you through these so we can have tips on how to do and maybe not to do things when we're talking to an audience. And the very first thing I want to start with is with content, right? So what is that we're going to be presenting? Why the audience should care? What are the highlights? What's the message? What's our punchline? All these things are going to go into that part where we're talking about content. So let's start with the very, very first part. When you're invited to do a talk, the very first thing that should come to mind is your audience. So really, the talk is not about you, right? It's about the audience. What does the audience need to know? What do they want to know? And why should they know, right? A big part of knowing your audience is knowing the level of preparedness that they have, right? What level, what college level they have? Is it a diverse audience? Is it a very specialized audience? This is very, very important when you're designing how you're going to convey the message that you want to convey. So here's an example of what's the working operating principle behind a centrifuge. And there's two types of slides here. So you can see one on the left that has images, has just the title, and really not many words. It actually has no equations, right? Whereas you look at the other one has a derivation of the centripetal acceleration. So which is responsible for the working principle of a centrifuge, right? So these two are geared to different audiences. One is more geared to a more general audience. Maybe they don't have a good physics background. Maybe they're introductory biologist in an introductory biologist course. So you see that there's not a whole lot of things in the slide as far as words and equations. But if you're working with a more specialized audience that maybe has a background in calculus or other high math skills, maybe you want to show them where are these forces coming in, what are the vectors, what are the directions, and you start talking about all this technical jargon, right? Whereas more in the left, you're just talking about the principle in the sense of a more general way, right? You put your things in there with the particles, As you spin it around, there's a force that's going to push them down to the bottom of the tube, right? And that's basically just the working principle. So what I wanted to convey with this slide is that depending on your audience is the complexity and depth of what you're going to be talking about. So when we're doing these types of talks, it's important to tell a story, and every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. When we're right at the beginning, it's important that you set up the stage in context of what do we know? What things have other people find out? And there's a lot of citation of literature, and there's a lot of reading that goes into that part, right? You have to know what's the state of the art, what people have found out. These types of things are important. Now, we're not looking to do a literature review of everything under the sun on that field, right? You're only going to be doing the key points, the very, very important things that pertain and are relevant to your talk. The other thing that's very important is to give a context in the sense of why should your audience care, right? Why should they be sitting down there for an hour listening to you to talk, right? So this is very important because the way that you capture their attention is the way that the talk will proceed and how well you're going to be delivering that message. So things like, for example, is it going to end up in a cure? Is it going to end up in a new method? So here you have a toddler inventing a new way to reaching out to where they want to do. I had 2 kids, so that's kind of a way to relate to that. Is it a product? So this is actually a product for the show Shark Tank, right? And it's, well, is it solving the problem? If you have an umbrella and you need your 2 hands, what do you do? So this will end up in a product. So what are the things that your audience need, and what should they be paying attention? If you notice, I started my talk saying that a lot of the things that we tend not to have when we're doing scientific training is learning how to convey a message and communicate. And there's a lot that goes into it. Okay. So that was kind of my way of framing it. Why you should be listening to this talk. All right. So when we're doing this at the beginning, it's important to give the context and all the relevant work and all the relevant citations, what the people are doing, who are the pros in the field, and what are the latest updates in this field. But it's also important to frame the problem. So it should be very, very clear to the audience. What is that thing that you're trying to solve? What is that thing that you want to improve? So the example I'm going to give here is, imagine if you have an oatmeal cookie and you like your oatmeal cookies really, really crispy. So you want to learn how to make a cookie very, very crispy, right? And a way to just kind of convey this message is that the community doesn't really understand what makes a cookie really, really crispy, okay? And that's why you're going to be concentrating what is that ingredient that makes it really good, right? So you're framing the problem. There's no one understanding. There's a gap in knowledge that you're going to be addressing. Now, the other thing is that you have to be very clear when you're stating what your strategy and what the proposed solution is. So what's your rationale? So you give them the context and the status of the field. You give them the problem you're going to solve. You give them the how you're going to try to solve it, right? And what's your proposed solution? The middle is like in a sandwich where the meat lies, right? It's right in the middle. That's like the juicy part. So here in the middle of a talk is where you're going to find methods. So if we're talking about in the context of scientific talks, we're going to be talking about the chemical reactions involved. What kind of techniques do you use? What kind of instrumentation you're going to be using? All those things will be located more towards the middle of your talk, right? If we're talking about the example of making the oatmeal cookie, that's where you're going to be finding the recipe, right? And that's kind of what I'm trying to convey here, with these two images. So you have a synthesis reaction. This is actually done in my lab. And you have the chemical reaction depicting what's happening in that bio. In the context of the oatmeal cookie, then you have like a flow diagram, right, of how you do that recipe. The middle is also the place where you're going to be showing what that data and what are the results that you found. So you're going to be showing the how, and you're also going to be showing the what. What do you find? What's your contribution? Now, we have to be very careful in this part that when we're presenting the data, we do it in a way that is a logical order. So you can be presenting first something that is justified by other pieces of data. Everything should be working out towards your main punchline, right? So it has to be very logical order. The other piece of this is that sometimes as scientists, we want to tell it all in the sense of all the things and all the details and all the really cool things that we found out, right? And we need to avoid putting a lot of detail into things. We only want to give the relevant information, the important information that the audience needs. Remember, you're thinking about the audience needs, not necessarily what you want, right? So that how does that information that you're putting out there, how is it relevant to your audience and how is it gonna help with your message, right? So try to avoid too much details. A really nice thing that I've seen lately in presentations is that they include like a link to a web page where they have a manuscript, or maybe they have more data or paper. And that's what we want to do, right? We want to entice questions. So when that Q&A part comes, people don't stay silent. We want people to ask questions. We want people to make suggestions. So it's really important that we give them just a taste and the important information that supports your punchline, but give them a way if they want to find out to do so. Okay, so that's a really neat thing that I found out lately. The other thing is that often the what, so the main piece that you found, is more important than the how. Okay, so sometimes, especially with specialized audience, they're really familiarized with a technique, they're very familiarized with methods, and they really want to know, what do you find out? What's the contribution? Okay, because they know how to mix things, they know how to operate a microscope, they know all these things. So the how is not very important. It's more important than what you found. Okay, and here in these two images, you're gonna see actual data from the synthesis that I showed you before. And the main message there is that whatever we made in that last reaction is not very crystalline. So that would be our punchline. That's the finding. That's what we want to report. And in the context of the oatmeal cookie will be that we got a really crispy cookie. So we made it. Okay. Now, towards the end, what we really want to do is kind of take everything that we just said in that 30 minutes, an hour of a talk, and then just kind of tie it back up to our introduction in the sense of why and what did we find out. So we reported the finding, right? In this case, we found that increasing the baking powder 3 times yields a crispier cookie. What is the implication of this? What is the implication of your finding? So the implication of your finding is the impact, is your contribution to a field, right? How you're advancing the knowledge within a field or of expertise. So the implication, going back to that example of the oatmeal cookie, will mean that now you can control the crispiness of the cookie. If you like it really, really crispy, if you don't like it really, really crispy. Now, the contribution or the broader contribution to the campus, to the field campus, to the field, will be that you created a new oatmeal recipe or new method to making crispy cookies. Okay, so we kind of have to define what are these findings and again, what is the implication for that field, why the people should care, and how does that finding help advance the field. So that will be the contribution. Okay, These are the things that we're considering as highlights of our conclusion or what we're giving back to the field of interest. Now, make sure that at the end, you always thank the people that give you the funding. Those are very, very important, right? They're sponsoring you. You also have to make sure that you thank your collaborators because they're putting time, they're putting intellectual input, and that's very important to advance your own work. You also have to make sure that you sum up those key points. Actually, if you look at studies, they say that people can only remember at about 60 minutes or pay attention to about 60 seconds, right? So that's not a whole lot. So we want to make sure that at the end we give them those points that are very relevant and very important. Okay. Think about the things that people will learn afterwards when they leave your talk. 24 hours. They left your talk. What are they gonna remember? So they'll probably remember your title. They'll probably remember if you did something wrong, right? If you had tech issues or anything like that. And they probably remember one or two slides, right? And that seems like not very efficient because sometimes we have many, many slides. But we want them 24 hours after they go to your talk to remember at least your main conclusion, the title, and how to reach out to you, okay? Just in case when they're working in their own work and they say, well, I think this person worked with that. So they're able to reach out again to you. We cannot expect them to remember everything that you said in an hour, especially with conferences. So there's acknowledge your mentors, collaborators, and the people that sponsor you. A good thing to always include, especially if you're looking for future collaborators and for future people to work with you or sponsor your research, is to include next steps. You never know who's in the audience, and maybe there's a potential sponsor in the audience. If you kind of show the next steps or the next things that you want to do, that really gathers the attention of the people that might fund you. So it's very, very important that you include some of these things as well. The other thing that's very important is that, again, you give them a way to reach out to you. And if you have social media, you can always also give those, if you feel comfortable, to the people so they can follow you on social media. I would encourage that everyone creates a LinkedIn account. It's professional. People can see your credentials. Also, encourage you to get a Twitter account. And I know Twitterverse cannot sometimes can be overwhelming and fill out with trolls, right? But a lot of good scientists have really nice accounts there, and you can always see when they publish papers, and you can always see if they're attending a conference that you might be attending to, so you get an opportunity to talk to them as well. So that brings me to the middle of the talk, right? Now we have an idea of how to organize our talk, but how about how to give it, how to perform? So for this part, I want to center on the speaker, you. So we're going to be talking about how we're going to start setting up the stage, how we're going to perform, how we're going to posture ourselves right, how we're going to walk the podium, and how are we going to make sure that we're keeping time where it needs to be. Okay. Very, very important when we're giving presentations, so you sound genuine, so you sound relaxed, so you don't sound robotic. Never, never memorize. I'm gonna download the attendance of this talk, and any talk that I attend with you guys in it, I'm gonna make sure that you're not memorizing. So if there's anything that you bring, do not memorize. It just ends up, sounding robotic, and people tend to lose interest. So I wanted to put this picture here. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the picture on the left. This was actually an audience. So there you see a judge, there you see lawyers, and, well, went up. Okay. And then you see a cat. So actually that cat is a lawyer with a cat filter. And this person did not prepare on time, right? So one of the things that you have to do when you're setting your stage is make sure that you get all the technical details where they need to be. You don't have filters, right? Because you don't want to end up in a professional meeting with a cat filter. And you want to just kind of connect everything, make sure that everything is projecting well, the sound is well, the Wi-Fi is working. All these types of things are very, very important before you start to talk. So that's why you have to be tech ready. So this is in the virtual presentation world. We also have in-person meetings, right? And in the person meetings, it's always awkward when we have technical issues. Now, don't get me wrong, technical issues always happen. What we want to do is to minimize these. And the way to minimize this is to be early and to just kind of do a rundown of what you're going to do. Play with your laser pointer. Well, not play, don't point it at people, but, point it at the screen, make sure that it's working, the advance of slides is working. All these little details are very, very important. Now, I had a mentor once that always told me to be early is to be on time, to be on time is to be late, and to be late is unacceptable. Now, sometimes culturally, we don't really go to places on time or early. We always want to be the latest to arrive. But when you're doing professional talks and scientific talks, it's really important to be on time. Why is that? Well, you get a chance to talk to the moderator. I don't know if you noticed when I log in, I talk to you, some of you guys, and I talk to Limari as well. So it gives you a chance to greet the attendees and just kind of talk to the moderators. It also gives you a chance to just kind of size up the room. Make sure you have water available. Where are the exits? How many people can fit in there? Where can you walk? Kind of have a plan A, plan B, where to connect your computer, where to put a USB, whatever that you need to do. It's just a really good idea to make sure that you're early. Now to the part where we start performing, right? Again, do not memorize. Practice, practice, practice. And not only practice, but just try to practice, record yourself. And that's a really good tip that I actually learned from Limari. Try to record yourself and listen to yourself. Because if you're boring yourself to sleep, you're probably boring your audience to sleep too, right? So it's a really good way to just kind of see how you're coming through when you're presenting. The other thing is that it gives you an opportunity to explain the same thing in different ways. And this could be helpful because if you're memorizing, you have a script, and then for some reason, and it's gonna happen, you totally forget the script. You're searching in your mind for keywords to continue the script, right? So we don't want to memorize. We do want to practice, practice, and practice. The other thing is that people can judge you in 0.1 seconds. Some studies suggest. But there's a pretty good agreement within the social scientist community that people had a really solid idea and a form of opinion of you in 7 seconds. This is incredible to me. In 7 seconds that they know you, they already have already judged your appearance and judged your attitude. So when you're presenting, try to avoid things that are really standard or that make you sound like, again, robotic or monotonous. So things like, hi, my name is Eds, and I'm gonna be talking about, and you read your title. Okay, so we kind of want to avoid that. We want to be approachable. Never, never, ever read from slides. So this goes back to the memorizing part, right? You want to be energetic, you want to project. So when you're reading slides, you're going like this. So you're just looking at the screen and not looking at your audience, okay? Try never to read from your own slides. The other thing that we noticed when we had speakers And when I'm speaking myself, I even noticing now, sometimes we talk really, really, really fast, and sometimes we talk really, really, really slow. So make sure that when you're doing your talk and doing your workshops, make sure that you are on time, but at the same time that you take time to breathe, right? And just kind of articulate each word so it's not lost in translation. Please use language appropriate language when you're presenting. I've seen this happen once or twice. It's not very common, and I can't believe you have to say it, but it's very important that you call the terms by their proper name. If there's any technical jargon that you need to learn, it's really important that you use it. Just avoid using buzzwords like machine learning or deep learning. If you really can't explain it, if you really don't understand what they are, they sound cool, they grab attention, but if you don't understand them, you might be explaining things the wrong way. So try to use that appropriate language. Poor use of humor. So sometimes people make jokes, and that's really fine. It lights up the room. It's really, really nice. However, if you think a joke that you might do, you're not sure if it's inappropriate or not, just don't do it. Don't risk it. Okay. If the fact that you're doubting whether a joke is appropriate, it's already a red flag. So just make sure that you use humor in a good way. What things to do? So take the time to breathe. It's not a race, and you organize your presentation clearly, so it should be a good way to deliver your message. So just take the time to breathe. The other thing is that make sure you engage with your audience. Look at them. See who's paying attention, who's on their phones. Maybe they're taking notes. Maybe they're writing some reference that you have on a slide. It's very important to engage with your audiences. This is especially important in the Q&A question session. That's where people ask your questions. It's always a good practice to repeat the question back to the person, just in case other people didn't hear it. So it's important that you engage visually with the person and just kind of think about it as a conversation, because that's really what it is. It's a conversation. Okay. A lot of people still get really nervous when they're speaking in public, and that's completely understandable, and it's normal because we're human. Now, a lot of people try to do affirmations. So you got this, you work hard on this, just kind of to reinforce that confidence. And that's a really good practice. The other thing is that I'm learning this just recently. You can do power poses. Okay. And I want to just kind of say a little bit on this. So what's a power pose? Just kind of look at the body language in these images. Okay. And there's something that you notice from all these people, right? All of them are speaking, and all of them are kind of opening, right? It's just kind of embracing the audience. So what you want to do is you want to have a body language that encourage people to approach you. And it's called a power pose because actually animals do this too. When animals want to assert their dominance, they tend to grow bigger, right? When animals are scared or they feel like something is not right in their environment, they tend to shrink, right? So the name of power poses actually comes from that fact, right? And these are high power power poses, and then low power poses. And you could see that in all of them, when you have a high power pose, people are just making themselves bigger. They're taking up space, right? And the interesting things about us humans is that when you have someone that makes themselves bigger and have a power pose, we don't mirror that behavior. We actually do the opposite. So if someone opens it up, we tend to shrink down, right? So you don't want to be the person that's shrinking down when you're giving the presentations. You want to be the one that's conveying confidence and this opening up, right? So dominate that podium. Sometimes it's inevitable. Sometimes the microphone is at the podium and you have to be stuck at the podium, and there's no other way around it, especially more formal events. But if you do have to be stuck at a podium, you can still do these types of poses while you're at the podium, right? You can still open up your arms. You can still put out your chest. Just have your head high, right? In the sense that you're portraying, again, confidence, and you're sending out the message and projecting really to a whole room. But if you have the ability to walk around the stage, this sometimes can energize people because it gets them on their feet, right? They have to be paying attention where you're going, what movements you're doing. Now, like everything in life, there must be a balance. You don't want to distract from your message, walking around the whole stage or even the room, but you don't want to just be stuck in a corner, just kind of, well, here's my talk, right? So it's a delicate balance between these things. It's good to be mindful of them. The other piece of this is time management. So when we're presenting, it's really important to keep a tight schedule because a lot of times, a lot of talks come afterwards. So we want to take the time to convey our message, but we also want to do it in a manner that we don't take time from other presenters, right? And this is especially important in conferences when you have a lot of people talking for 10, 15 minutes, one after the other. One little mishap in time, and then you're all of a sudden cascades into the other lectures. So we want to be mindful of time. We want to be mindful of the time for our attendees. And we want to, again, articulate our message, but we don't want to rush through it. Okay, so it's a delicate balance. That brings me to my third piece of this talk, third and final piece. So we're going to be talking now a little bit about slide design. PowerPoint has been sometimes rendered as a useful tool, but also not so useful tool because of the things that I mentioned that people tend to read from them, or overly use it or underuse it. So how can we take in tips from experience from other social scientists, for example, that they do work about presenting in public? It's kind of what I'm going to be going into. So I want you to think about a good presentation that you attended lately. What things were, what elements were the things that they did right? And maybe not a good presentation that you attended. What are the things that were maybe not done correctly or that you felt discouraged by? And I want you to try to identify them as you do your own presentations, right? When we're doing a good presentation, we have to make sure that's organized in a coherent argument. So it's really good idea that you come up with your punchline, your main message, the takeaway that you want the audience to work with, and just kind of organize everything around that. Say it at the beginning, say it at the middle, and then say it right at the end, okay? Just repetition helps with retention. Now, especially in scientific talks, you want to have a concise message, and you want that message to be supported by your data. And at the same time, you want to leave room for questions because you're going to have a question and answer section, okay? When you're designing your slides, make sure they're readable and also they're clear. If you're putting a lot of clutter in, if you're putting a lot of images, if there's a lot of colors or not so much colors, or all these things matter to an audience when you're paying attention. So it's really important that you keep those in mind. Make sure also that your presentation reaches a diverse audience. So sometimes, even in a very specialized community, you have people that maybe all of them are biologists, but some are ecologists, some are molecular biologists. So there's always diversity within even specialized audiences. Just keep that in mind as well. Again, well time. Well time could be just plan to spend 1 to 2 minutes for every slide. So a presentation of 60 minutes, you should have around 30 slides or less, right? And well designed. And we're going to see some examples of that, okay? So I'm going to show you some slides, and I want you to think about what is the overarching theme here. What are they trying to convey with me with these slides, to me with these slides? Is it simple? Is it cluttered? Does it have a lot of colors? Doesn't have a lot of colors? How's the spelling? Figures, tables, all these things. I want you to think about those, okay? So let's start by this one. So what are the things that you're noticing here? You're probably noticing that it has a title. Does the title convey what the images and the use of the words there? Are they saying something about what these images are and what do they represent? Do you see references? Do you see lots of text, or do you see bullet points? Is area abbreviation spelled out? Like, for example, there you see organic photovoltaics, OPV. These types of things are really good to include. The other thing that you'll see is that the figure has a caption. And within that caption states the reference that where the figure was taken. This is especially important to protect intellectual property. Okay. You'll notice also that it has a slide number. It's really good to have slide numbers because in the Q&A section, people can refer back to a specific slide. Now let's look at this one. There's a lot going on there, right? You could see there's some bullet points, there's some big text, there's overlapping images, there's a lot of color. There's also words in that image where you have like the blue swirly lines, and you can't really read those. So you want to make sure that you use clear fonts, so things like white. If you're using a darker a background, you want to use a clear, not a clear white font. If you're using a white background, you want to make sure that you use like blue, dark blue, or black, just to make sure that your text stand out. And just kind of avoid the clutter. This slide is really, really busy. How about this one? This one is a little bit better, right? So you have a white background, you have dark letters, you have an appropriate, I would say, point font for those letters. Now, one of the things that I would like to mention, though, is that when you're using text, it's a really good idea to use the sans serif font. What's a sans serif font? So if you look at the letters here, they all of them have like points that come out of it, like little edges, right? If you look at the T, it's not a straight line. It has a little bit of edges that come up. You want to avoid these types of letters because it makes it harder for the reader to read. You want to use fonts just like Calibri or Arial or Helvetica. All these text fonts make it easier for the reader. How about this one? So this one, we have a title. We have quite a lot of text. I would have preferred bullet points. This is actually a slide from one of my students. And I noticed there that there's a spell error. So right there where it says cobalt manganese, oh, that's great. They're cutting the grass. Okay. There's a superscript that a subscript that should be there instead of that 3. So just make sure that it's free of errors. How about this one? So this one has a lot of stuff in there, and you could see that there's a graph and the axis is missing. So just make sure when you're using your graphs You have the Y in your x-axis label, and have relevant images. So the body is cute and all, but I don't think it's relevant to the message of your slide, right? This brings me to figures, tables, and images. Whenever you're using a figure, whenever you're using an image, make sure it's relevant, because figures take space. If when you're talking, you're not using it, then that figure or that image or that picture is not relevant, okay? The other thing is that it's really good idea to have captions on the figures. Maybe someone missed what you were saying for a little bit, so it's really good to have captions on those figures. They have to be very well designed, so they have to convey a message by themselves. And you have to be very, very worried about tables. I personally don't love tables in presentations, especially if they're super big. So I'll show you an example here in a minute. This is a bad and a good table. So what do I mean by that? So the table is a really good table for maybe a manuscript, because it has a lot of information, has some comparisons between different work that other people have done. So it's a really good table for a manuscript. Not so much for a PowerPoint presentation. The font is really small. You can barely read it. Seems like it's a screenshot picture, right? So it's not very clearly defined. The resolution is not very good. So all those things you need to take into account when you're using your own figures. The other very important thing is that sometimes we navigate the web for pictures, and sometimes those pictures cannot be used. So here I have kind of like a flow chart, and I know that it's really small and hard to read, and that's why I'm including you a link to the actual PDF, okay? But you can use this, and I find it really, really useful to know whether I can use it for my class, my presentations, who to give credit, all these types of things, right? Because we want to avoid plagiarism. We want to avoid taking things from others. If you do want to use images, there's a lot of free image repositories or databases that you can use. And here I give you 5 of them. All of these have really good image resolutions, and they're free to use, and you don't have to acknowledge the author. Okay, so they don't have copyrights. So if you want to do that, you can just go to each of these links and navigate whatever you want to do. Like, for example, for that first image, I just kind of put people thinking, and it was very interesting to see that almost all images people were going like this. So that's just something to kind of learn about the body language again. But yeah, these are really, really good sources for you to get really good images that are free. So this actually brings me to the end of my talk. During this talk, we have talked about the content of the actual presentation. We have talked about the speaker, which is you, things to do, not to do. And we also talk a little bit about the design of your slides. These topics are, the information on them is just humongous. If you do want, I had some resources that I can later just kind of pass off if you shoot me an email. But just make sure that there's a lot of more information on the web that you can find out for these. So just reach out and do your own research to just kind of see what a good presentation is. So with that, I want to thank you for being super early here and listening to me, and now listening